Would you like to hear my favourite joke about anxiety? It goes like this. Knock, knock. Who's there? That's it, that's the whole joke. Stupid. Today we're talking about the connection between alcohol and anxiety. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. One of the things I liked least about being a suicidal, oblivion chronic alcoholic was a panic attack every time my phone buzzed or there was a knock at my door or I received an email. At the worst of my drinking, I didn't check my physical mailbox for months, just in the paralysing fear that there might be a bill in there. It might contain some kind of bad news. So I just never checked. I'd rather not know. And if there was a police car parked on my street, I would convince myself it was there for me, and I would spy on it from behind the curtains. It's the kind of anxiety that can make you delusional. The thought of running into someone I knew on the street generally meant that I wouldn't go out until after dark, or I'd go out very early in the morning. And if I did bump into somebody I knew and I had to have a conversation in this anxious condition, I would make a point to never walk that way ever again. Towards the end, I would wake up at 3 a.m, still drunk and in withdrawal at the same time, convinced that I was going to die, with my heart leaping around in my chest. And I would have palpitations. That's normal with alcoholism, very serious palpitations. They were so serious that I felt like my heart had stopped and I would beat on my chest to restart it. Absolutely neurotic behaviour. To the point where, when I woke up in the middle of the night convinced I was about to die, I would do a number of weird mental gymnastics to try to ease my suffering, to try to ease my anxiety. And that would often include trying to convince myself that I'd had a good life and that if I were to die now, then it wouldn't be that bad. That my imminent death was really nothing to fear because I'd had an interesting life. That was a real conscious thought when I was lying in bed, convinced I was about to die. That was a rational thought process that I would try to console myself about my imminent death just to try to assuage my anxiety for a moment. I was trying to make peace with dying just as a way to kind of reduce my anxiety about my own death. The ways that the kind of convoluted tricks that I had to play on myself to appease my anxiety, it sounds insane now that I'm sober. And if you're one of the minority of my audience who doesn't have an alcohol problem, but watches my content for other reasons, and you've never had a kind of brush with anxiety, perhaps what I just described might sound kind of alien to you, like very weird behaviour. It does to me, but to you especially, it must feel very weird. But I can assure you that the sense that the feeling of impending death is very real to us alcoholics, especially when we start to sober up and we're in withdrawal. For a while, the anxiety gets worse before it gets better, and it really does feel like death is coming for us. Now, when I first started actively trying to get sober, I was quickly diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. But I've never been sure which came first, the anxiety or the alcohol. I was a nervous teenager, for sure. When I started drinking at about 14 years old, started regularly drinking, I was socially awkward, socially anxious, and alcohol was kind of a salve for those things. I tended to be lost in my own world, very much in my own mind, quite a lot of the time. And I think that that's how it starts for a lot of us, right? Does that sound familiar to you? Were you drinking to overcome anxiety to begin with? I know I was. And in the short term, it does feel true to say drinking takes the edge off, or I drink because I'm anxious, or I need to drink to be able to socialize. All of those feel true. And for a while, in those early days, alcohol can feel like relief from the social pressure and relief from the anxiety of growing up. And in the early days of drinking, alcohol does feel like relief. It does seem to loosen us up a little bit, like our jaw unclenches, our muscles become slightly looser and relaxed, and the voice of anxiety in our head trying to make us flee the situation starts to quiet down a little bit in the early days. But it's not true for long. It is true to say, though, that we drink because alcohol did a job. It was effective at what it was doing. It reduced the feelings of anxiety, and it stopped us living in our own heads for a while, for a few hours, while the alcoholic high lasted. And we are in our heads quite a lot, I think. Would you agree that alcoholics tend to be quite an introspective, quite a self-critical lot? We're quite a brooding bunch, us alcoholics. Does that sound true to you? We tend to be in a constant feeling of tension within ourselves, always in conflict with ourselves as alcoholics. And that inevitably produces a constant background of anxiety. We're never quite comfortable in our own bodies, you know? My friend over at Sober Strong, she's talked about this better than anyone. She talks about how growing up and through her 20s, she felt like she had to drink in order to kind of come out of her shell and to be this kind of outgoing, extroverted partier. But once she quit, she discovered that underneath that facade, that very fragile facade, was actually quite an introverted person, not this outgoing party person. That was all a pretense, covering up who she really was, which was this kind of introspective and introverted person. And I really relate to that, because I did that too. From when I started drinking at about 14, right up until I became like this kind of chronic, isolating alcoholic, all of that time I was drinking to socialize or to be extroverted in order to make connections with people. But underneath all of the bravado, I'm actually a very private and introspective person. I just didn't know it until I got sober. I had to find out who I was once more. And that dissonance between who I thought I had to be and who I actually was beneath all of the alcohol and the bravado, it caused a real dissonance within me, a conflict in my identity, I think. And that dissonance causes anxiety. The not being able to reconcile the who I thought I needed to be and who I actually longed to be and who I was inside. It caused a kind of friction. And this facade of this kind of wishing to be funny and wishing to be sexy and wishing to be popular and interesting, all of that was hiding a very nervous and lonely person beneath. And that all contributed to my self-destructive drinking. I'm sorry to interrupt at this point just as we're getting going, but if you like this kind of laid-back sobriety content, this kind of sobriety content you can fall asleep to, and you would like to see more of it, you would like to see me do more of this kind of content, then subscribe here on YouTube so that YouTube knows that this is the kind of content you're looking for. And also head over to the Patreon at Backcountry Sober, the Backcountry Sober Patreon, where you'll find more behind the scenes and more personal stuff, as well as a growing and very welcoming community of sober and nearly sober people. We now return you to Home Improvements with Tim Allen. There's a negative feedback loop at play here, a kind of alcohol-anxiety feedback loop, where each feeds into the other one in an increasingly negative spiral. It goes something like this. We feel anxious, so we drink to stamp the anxiety out and relax a little bit, and then the alcohol feels effective for that purpose. However, it's also disrupting our body's natural anxiety-fighting processes, its natural anxiety systems. So the next day, when you wake up from the period of drinking, you have a kind of social paranoia, like, what did I say last night? Who did I say it to? You're nervous about what you might have done when you were out of control, and you feel the dread before you check your phone. That anxiety gets slightly worse each time. So every time you experience it, it's slightly worse than the previous time, which leads you to drink earlier and earlier. And thus you're stuck in this negative alcohol anxiety feedback loop until over time you start drinking to alleviate the negative anxiety caused by alcohol. And when you start drinking to alleviate the symptoms caused by drinking, you are trapped in that feedback loop. You have crossed a threshold. And once you cross that threshold, well, congratulations, you're an alcoholic now. When you're in that negative feedback loop, drinking to alleviate problems caused by drinking, your tolerance is also increasing relative to it. Right? So you need to be drinking more in order to quench that feeling of rising anxiety. You have to drink more and more each time. And your anxiety is growing in proportion to that. And the problem is, if you're anything like me, if your pattern of self-annihilating drinking is anything like mine, then you won't notice when you've crossed that threshold. In fact, you may not notice that threshold exists at all. Because what we're talking about here is a transition from hangover to hangxiety and ultimately to withdrawal. When I first started experiencing withdrawal rather than hangxiety and rather than hangover, I didn't even know that alcohol withdrawal was a thing. Now, you might call me naive, but the truth is, experience is the one thing we only ever get after we need it. And I didn't know. I had no experience with withdrawal until I understood what it was too late, right? And because we don't necessarily know what withdrawal is when we first start experiencing it, well, you might convince yourself that your anxiety is completely unrelated to your drinking. You might be deliberately, willingly naive. You may be deliberately suppressing the thought that your drinking is also causing your anxiety. And we only have, in that period, we only have one medicine for that anxiety. And that's, well, you know what it is. Glug. One more, please. When you're in that stage, when you're progressing into withdrawal rather than hangxiety, what it means is that hangxiety has become your new baseline. That is the minimum anxiety you will reach, and it's very, very high. Your baseline anxiety has risen to the point of hangxiety, and you're experiencing that every time you're not drinking. When you are drinking, you get withdrawals. Anytime you're not drinking, you have feelings of hangxiety. In fact, for me, by the end, I yearned for just hangxiety rather than the paralyzing near-death experience of alcoholic anxiety, which is genuinely dangerous. A panic attack is not going to kill you normally, but in withdrawal, all of your metabolism and all of your central nervous system is in a state of hyperexcitability, and it is actually dangerous. The hangxiety and the panic attacks that come with it, they stop being benign, and they become malignant. We are in that period, we are in a constant state of fight or flight syndrome, where we want to flee every situation that we're in. I remember being in my apartment and being deeply uncomfortable there as I was withdrawing once, every time in fact, and having the urge to run from my apartment. So I would put on like some scruffy clothes and I would go outside thinking a walk might clear my anxiety. But the moment I would have claustrophobia in my apartment, and the moment I stepped outside, that would change into agoraphobia. And now I would be having crippling anxiety from being outside instead. And I would retreat back into the apartment, and that would yo-yo backwards and forwards for days until it subsided. And the anxiety alone, even before chronic alcoholism, just anxiety is bad enough. I remember having it so bad once that I delayed a chartered flight out of Vietnam, a work trip where my boss had chartered a flight from Vietnam back to Shanghai. And I had anxiety so bad that I was terrified of getting on the plane. And usually I'm fine with that, but the anxiety will affect you in strange ways. And I was in I bought a bottle of duty-free whiskey from the Vietnamese duty-free, and I went to the airport toilets. When my flight was due, I was already due to take off, and I was so paralyzed with anxiety and needed alcohol so badly that I went to the airport toilets, opened the bag, drank the entire bottle. I haven't thought about this for so long. And then just left it because I couldn't get it on the flight because I'd opened it. And just put it in the bin in the toilets and then went and got on that flight. I should talk about that trip a little bit. I should talk about what happened in Vietnam, because the more I think about that, the more I start to recognize that was really when I spun out into chronic alcoholism. That's where it happened, I think. And if you would like me to talk about that, do let me know in the comments, because it's an interesting story to me. Anyway, the anxiety is so crippling in late-stage alcoholism, it makes it difficult to seek help. A lot of you get frustrated with alcoholics because it's difficult for us because we refuse to seek help. And that's not necessarily laziness or unwillingness. Sometimes it's just straight up anxiety. The thought of interacting with another person, the thought of having to be honest in front of another person, or the thought of going to AA into a busy room where you might have to speak in public, it comes with so much anxiety that we'd rather just hide under the covers with another bottle. That seems like the easier option. And that was me, man. In early sobriety, I would somehow force myself to go to AA, back when I was still attending. And I would sit, the one I was going to at the time was in a school, and we all had these kind of, when the desk and the table is integrated, and they were all slightly too small for adults, and that room was a popular one. So there was like 40 of us crammed into that room, and I would sit there with clenched fists and my eyes closed and my palms just pooling sweat, and shaking and shivering and sweating, just from the anxiety of being in that crowded room. The fear, the flee or fight syndrome, just absolutely overwhelming. Not sure whether I should stand up and go, like my leg twitching, and my hands twitching, just anything to come, or doing all the tricks to ground myself, trying to control my breathing. And I was doing that in AA. I must have looked like a fucking lunatic. I guess I was. It's a long time ago. And it was all I could do just to try to survive the meeting. And it's tiring as well. So fatigue is an obvious symptom of alcoholism, and the early sobriety. Fatigue is off the charts. But the effort it takes to be in that level of anxiety is itself exhausting. You're so tense and your brain is going 1,000 miles a minute and you're panicking and you feel threatened. Your threat perception is off the charts. Even that alone is exhausting. Sleep is crucial, but very difficult to get because the anxiety comes with insomnia, and the insomnia propagates the anxiety. So it's another negative feedback loop. This stuff sucks. So what is actually going on here? What is anxiety, and what purpose does it serve, like evolutionarily, if that's a word? Well, it's like this. Anxiety is your nervous system anticipating threat, right? It's not responding to an actual danger, that's fear. It's responding to the potential for danger, that's anxiety. Anxiety is a reaction to a danger that might happen. In evolutionary terms, as unpleasant as it is to experience, anxiety is actually very useful. It's trying to protect us, it's preparing us. Historically, anxiety is what made us scan our surroundings for predators as we kind of shuffled across the savannah. And today, a little anxiety is healthy. It sharpens our focus and increases our vigilance and our preparation. It's very useful before, an interview or a date or public speaking or a competition, that kind of thing. In small doses, anxiety is very healthy. It keeps us safe. But with alcohol, the signal of anxiety in our brains is suppressed. However, the actual cause of the anxiety is not resolved. It's just a signal. It's just the light switch is turned off. But the actual cause of the anxiety is not addressed. Our awareness of it is deadened. Your anxiety just kind of sits there, accruing interest with every period of withdrawal, every cycle of drunkenness and withdrawal that anxiety, the baseline increases. And your anxiety, it never goes away. Your brain just stops registering those signals for a while. So alcohol is a depressant, it's not a stimulant. It's a genuine pharmacological sedative. It is sedation disguised as anxiety relief. That's what alcohol is. And it steps on the nervous system's own innate anxiety suppression systems. To combat the artificially sedative effects of alcohol, your body downregulates GABA and it increases glutamate activity, attempting to restore balance in your central nervous system. And the result of that, in layman's terms, is that your central nervous system is more excitable and you start to experience severe anxiety even when you're not drinking. As I keep trying to reinforce, your baseline anxiety is rising all the time. And what's worse is that there's a trap door under all of this, right? So if you drink to help you handle something that makes you anxious, perhaps you have, a public speaking engagement or a flight or something like that, then your brain never learns that you were able to handle that situation, and therefore it doesn't reduce your anxiety the next time that thing happens. Instead, what it learns is that you need alcohol to survive those situations. That's what your brain picks up on and reinforces. And as a result of that, your anxiety actually increases with repetition. So normally, if a sober person is experiencing anxiety before an event, the more that they do that event, the more their anxiety decreases. But when alcohol is involved to treat that anxiety, your brain learns that alcohol is the solution to that problem, and your anxiety will rise in order to make you pursue alcohol every time it happens. So your anxiety never gets better. You're chasing your tail forever. In clinical language, what that means is that your brain blocks the updating of threat models. That's how it would be expressed clinically. And you never get less anxious, only more anxious. Instead of a healthy amount of anxiety telling you to prepare, telling you to be ready, alcohol-conditioned anxiety conditions you to believe that you can't cope without alcohol. The number of self-fulfilling prophecies here, self-reinforcing spirals. So that's what it brings us to. Alcohol doesn't cure anxiety. It suppresses it. Eventually, you're not drinking to calm anxiety about life. You're drinking to calm anxiety about not drinking. You're not drinking to feel good anymore. You're drinking to avoid feeling worse. And that is alcohol dependency summarized in a sentence. Isn't it? When you're not drinking to feel good, you're just drinking not to feel worse. That is alcoholism. And I think I'll leave it there for tonight. So if you got anything out of this episode, please do subscribe here on YouTube and head over to the patreon.com/backcountrysober and join the community there. Thank you for watching. And as always, good luck out there.